Let's go back in a time, in the ancient lands of northern Mesopotamia, around the 4th millennium BCE, began to feel the influence of the Sumerians from the south. Imagine Nineveh, which later became the Assyrian Empire's capital, possibly starting off as a bustling colony of Sumerian merchants. However, around 3000 BCE, urban life in northern Mesopotamia started to decline. This could have been due to changes in climate or the movement of people. But by the mid-3rd millennium, urbanism was back, and the region became a hub for long-distance trade, with Assyrian trading colonies popping up as far away as Asia Minor. During this time, northern Mesopotamia was divided into several small kingdoms. One of these was Ashur, named after its chief god, which became the core of what we now call Assyria. With the rise of Sargon's empire, all of Mesopotamia, including Ashur, was unified. Later, in the 18th century BCE, northern Mesopotamia fell under the rule of the king of Mari, Samsi-Addu. By 1796 BCE, he had extended his control over most of northern Mesopotamia and much of Syria. His government, along with that of his sons, is well documented in thousands of letters and official documents found in the royal archive at Mari. His kingdom was managed from 3 cities, Ekaledam, Ashur, and Mari, and included numerous petty kingdoms and semi-nomadic clans that constantly challenged the government. After Samsi-Addu's death in 1776 BCE, his kingdom was split. His son Ishun-Dagan ruled the northern half, which we know as Assyria, while Zimri-Lim, a descendant of Mari's previous royal family, ruled the south. Assyria experienced a period of foreign domination. It was briefly united with southern Mesopotamia under Hammurabi, the king of Babylon. However, after Hammurabi's death, Assyria regained its independence but soon fell under the control of the Mitanni. Around 1360 BCE, King Ashur-uballit I of Assyria broke free from Mitanni rule and took over the eastern half of their kingdom. With the Hittites occupying the rest, the Mitanni faded into history. The first period of Assyrian greatness began. Assyria's geography made it vulnerable to attacks, so it organized itself as a military state, always ready for war. The Assyrians were among the first in the Middle East to adopt chariots from neighboring Indo-European peoples, allowing them to launch offensives against their neighbors. Over the centuries, they became one of the leading powers in the Middle East, alongside the Hittites, the Kassites of Babylonia, and the Egyptians. They expanded into northern Syria, northern Mesopotamia, and Armenia. In the late 13th century BCE, Assyria and the newly expansionist Elam brought Kassid Babylonia to its knees. They invaded Babylonia, installed their own governors, but soon faced political instability and palace coups. The Babylonians revolted and regained their independence by 1227 BCE. Just over a century later, Tiglath-Pileser I rose to power. He campaigned far and wide, reaching the Mediterranean Sea and defeating the Arameans, who were a threat to all of Mesopotamia. Tiglath-Pileser brought Babylon under Assyrian control once again. After Tiglath-Pileser's murder in 1077 BCE, the ancient states of Mesopotamia faced massive migrations of Aramean tribes. This period marked the eclipse of the old centers of civilization. The Arameans steadily pushed back Assyria's borders and settled in new kingdoms in Syria and northern Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, Babylonia plunged into chaos, with Aramean tribes and other groups taking over. One such group, the Chaldeans, settled in southern Babylonia around Ur, hence the biblical reference to Ur of the Chaldees. Now, towards the end of the 10th century BCE, Assyria hit rock bottom. Their territory had shrunk to a narrow strip along the Tigris. Despite this, they remained a tight-knit nation with a battle-hardened army. Under King Adad-Nirari II and his son Tukulti-Ninurta II, the Assyrians began pushing back against their enemies in what they saw as wars of national liberation. They drove the Arameans out of the Tigris Valley and repelled mountain tribes. By the end of their reigns, Assyria had reclaimed all of northern Mesopotamia. During this period, the Middle East was undergoing significant changes. Iron started to replace bronze for weapons and farming tools, and alphabetic scripts began to take over from older writing systems like cuneiform. These innovations would have a lasting impact on the Assyrians. The reign of Ashurnasirpal II marked a major turning point in Assyria's resurgence. He spent his early years quelling rebellions and solidifying the kingdom, extending Assyrian territory, building and garrisoning border fortresses, and subduing neighboring mountain tribes. In 877 BCE, Ashurnasirpal led a significant military expedition through Syria to the Mediterranean. This wasn't a war of conquest but a clear message of Assyrian power, echoing the glory of Tiglath-Pileser I. The entire Middle East was shaken. Ashurnasirpal wasn't just a warrior, he had a refined side too. He loved zoology and botany, bringing exotic animals and plants back to his imperial parks and gardens from his expeditions. He also had a passion for construction, building a new capital at Nimrud, a hallmark of great Mesopotamian monarchs. His successor, Shalmaneser III, took Assyrian military campaigns to new heights, spending 31 out of his 35-year reign at war. His armies ventured further than ever before, reaching Armenia, Cilicia, Palestine, the Taurus and Zagros mountains, and even the Gulf. Though Shalmaneser didn't significantly expand Assyrian territory, his reign marked the peak of this phase, with Assyrian armies conducting long-distance raids for loot, wealth, and prestige. Under previous rulers, Assyrian wars were mostly defensive, aimed at protecting core territories and vital trade routes to Syria, Anatolia, Iran, and Babylonia. However, under Ashurnasirpal and Shalmaneser, these conflicts increasingly became raids for booty and glory. And every spring, the Assyrian king would gather his troops and lead them to war. At this time, his targets were the rulers of small kingdoms and tribes spread across the Middle East, including regions like Syria, Palestine, Anatolia, and Iran. Some princes bravely opposed the Assyrians, though they rarely succeeded. Others fled to the desert or mountains, while some submitted to the Assyrian king, bringing gifts and promising to pay tribute. But woe to those who broke their promises. The Assyrians would launch another devastating campaign against them, torturing and killing rebel leaders, massacring and enslaving populations, burning towns and villages, and destroying crops. Terrified, neighboring rulers would rush to offer gifts and swear allegiance. Annual tribute was imposed or reimposed on all. Loaded with spoils and trailing behind human captives, flocks and herds, the Assyrian army would then return home and disband. Their reputation for cruelty preceded them, often defeating their enemies in spirit before even meeting them on the battlefield. While Assyria's actual territory didn't expand much during this period, its sphere of influence, its hunting ground, as one modern scholar put it, grew significantly. Many terrified peoples within this sphere professed obedience to the Assyrian king and paid him tribute. And Babylonia was treated differently. This region had suffered greatly during the Age of Confusion around 1000 BCE, and its problems persisted. Large numbers of Aramean peoples, especially in the south, posed a constant threat to Babylonian rulers, who often had little control over their territories, particularly when the Aramean groups united under a charismatic leader. The Assyrians were naturally drawn into this turmoil, initially to take advantage of Babylon's weakness and seize territory. However, the Assyrians held a deep reverence for Babylon, which had been the cultural and spiritual center of Mesopotamian civilization since Hammurabi's time. From Shalmaneser's reign onwards, Assyrian kings took on the role of protectors of Babylon, treating its kings with great respect and campaigning against their enemies, while expecting their allegiance in return. At the end of Shalmaneser's reign in 827 BCE, a serious rebellion shook the kingdom, led by one of his sons. This revolt, supported by major cities like Ashur and Nineveh and 27 other cities, seemed to stem from the old nobility's resentment. Their power was centered on the old capitals, and they felt excluded from the royal court's power at the new capital, Nimrud. It took 5 long years to quell the rebellion, by which time the old king had died and his younger son, Shamshi-Adad V, ascended the throne. During this turmoil, Assyria's vassals broke free, and Shamshi-Adad spent his reign reasserting control. After his death, his young son, Adad-Nirari III, came under the influence of the queen, Samuramat, later known in legends as Semiramis. Samuramat and Adad-Nirari worked to restore Assyria's power, allowing Adad-Nirari to act as protector of the Babylonian king against his Aramean enemies. However, after Adad-Nirari's premature death, Assyria plunged into a period of internal instability, revolts, and unsuccessful campaigns, exacerbated by severe epidemics. At this very time, developments in the wider Middle East made Assyria's international position less secure. The empire needed strong leadership to emerge from this crisis. Fortunately, Tiglath-Pileser III would soon rise to meet this challenge. For about a century, the northern kingdom of Urartu had been rising in power, much like Assyria. Urartu had its own vassal states that paid tribute, acknowledged its supremacy, and followed it into war. As Urartu's influence spread among the small states of northern Syria, which had previously been under Assyrian control, it became clear that Assyria needed to shift its strategy. Annual campaigns for prestige and booty were no longer enough. Assyria now had to conquer, occupy, and hold territory in Syria and western Iran to fend off this new rival. Enter Tiglath-Pileser III. Recognizing the threat, he launched an attack into northern Syria and defeated the Urartu army when it tried to assist its allies. Instead of pulling back, Tiglath-Pileser established permanent Assyrian provinces in Syria and stationed garrisons in key cities. When more troubles arose, he expanded Assyrian territory further into southern Syria, annexing Damascus and half of Israel's territory. This prompted many other Syrian rulers, including the king of Israel, to acknowledge the Assyrian king as their overlord. Tiglath-Pileser also pushed Assyrian borders deep into the Zagros Mountains and even attacked Urartu itself, though without much success. Meanwhile, Babylonia had descended into chaos. In a traditional Assyrian role, Tiglath-Pileser campaigned against its enemies in southern Mesopotamia, particularly the Chaldeans. Breaking from past practices, he proclaimed himself king of Babylon. At home, Tiglath-Pileser carried out sweeping reforms to strengthen royal authority. He increased the number of administrative districts, making them smaller to give the king and his court more control. He implemented a full-blooded imperial system, replacing many vassal kings with provincial governors. He reformed the army, creating a standing force of foreign troops from conquered peoples, which could campaign year-round and maintain permanent garrisons. To improve communication, Tiglath-Pileser set up a system of runners who carried messages between the king and provincial governors. He also introduced the policy of mass deportation, forcibly resettling populations from conquered areas to distant provinces, which profoundly impacted Middle Eastern society. Under Tiglath-Pileser, Assyria shifted from raiding to building a true empire with a complex administrative machinery. After Tiglath-Pileser's death, his son Shalmaneser ruled briefly before being succeeded by Sargon II, who likely usurped the throne amidst great instability. Sargon's first major act was the capture and destruction of Samaria, the capital of Israel, in 722 BCE, ending the kingdom of Israel. Its territory was divided among its neighbors, and its people were deported throughout the Assyrian Empire. Sargon faced new geopolitical challenges from Egypt and Elam, both of which, along with Urartu, saw Assyria as a threat and sought to weaken it. In southern Mesopotamia, Elam supported Babylon's enemies, primarily the Aramean tribes and the Chaldeans. Merodach-Baladan, a Chaldean leader, seized Babylon's throne with Elam's help, and Sargon struggled to dislodge him. Only in 708 BC did Assyria regain full control over Babylonia. During Sargon's reign, Egypt supported major rebellions in Syria and Palestine, both of which were crushed by the Assyrians. Sargon also defeated Urartu, reducing its influence. By the time of his death, Sargon had made Assyria larger and more powerful than ever. He also built a new capital, Dur-Sherikin, completed just a year before he was killed in battle. And the news of Sargon's death sparked revolts across the empire, forcing his successor, Sennacherib, to quell them. One notable event during this time was the famous Assyrian siege of Jerusalem, where the Assyrian army mysteriously withdrew, possibly due to a natural calamity. In Babylonia, Merodach-Baladan led another great rebellion. Sennacherib drove him out, deporting over 200,000 people to Assyria and installing his son as the ruler after more revolts. Sennacherib also conducted a major operation against Elam, bringing back substantial booty. Elam retaliated by invading southern Mesopotamia, but the Assyrians eventually prevailed, and in 689 BCE, Sennacherib destroyed the city of Babylon in frustration. Despite constant warfare, Sennacherib accomplished much at home, constructing temples, public buildings, restoring towns, and completing major irrigation projects to boost agriculture. He moved the court back to Nineveh, beautifying and expanding the city to make it a fitting capital for the superpower of its day. In 681 BCE, while worshipping in one of Nineveh's temples, Sennacherib was assassinated by one of his sons. When Sennacherib was assassinated, Esarhaddon, his chosen successor, was in exile due to family rivalries. As soon as he heard of his father's death, he quickly gathered an army and marched to the capital. Overcoming his brothers and securing the throne with significant popular support, according to his own propaganda at least, Esarhaddon took charge. One of his first major acts was to begin rebuilding Babylon, a project that spanned his entire reign. This effort won him the loyalty of the Babylonians, resulting in relatively little trouble from that region. Esarhaddon also managed to place a friendly king on the throne of Elam, stabilizing the situation on that frontier. During his reign, new threats emerged that would eventually contribute to the fall of the Assyrian Empire. In 679 BCE, Scythian and Cimmerian hordes broke through the Taurus Mountains. Esarhaddon swiftly drove them back. He also attempted to counter the rising power of the Medes, a warlike Iranian people, through cavalry raids and by supporting rival princes to weaken the Median king. In the west, revolts continued. In 677 BCE, Sidon rebelled, leading Esarhaddon to destroy the city, deport its people to Assyria, and give its territory to Tyre. To tackle a major threat at its source, Esarhaddon led an army into Egypt, conquering the entire country despite strong resistance. The defeated pharaoh fled south but soon returned, leading a resistance movement. Esarhaddon was marching to confront this threat when he died. And Esarhaddon tried to ensure a smooth succession by having his vassals swear loyalty to his chosen heir, Ashurbanipal, and appointing his younger son, Shamash-Shum-Ukin, as king of Babylon under his brother. Ashurbanipal quickly set out to quell the Egyptian revolt. He sent a general to reclaim Memphis and then marched south towards Thebes. However, hearing of a new revolt in the Delta region, he turned north and crushed it before it could begin, executing or deporting the leaders to Nineveh. Realizing the need for local support, the Assyrians began favoring certain Delta princes, some of whom had been involved in the recent revolt. 2 years later, the Assyrians faced a new invasion from Nubia and marched south to destroy Thebes. Meanwhile, rebellions in Syria, particularly in Tyre, required further action, although Ashurbanipal did not exact the usual severe reprisals. In the following years he campaigned on the northern and eastern frontiers against the Mannai, Medes, Elamites, and Cimmerians. In 655 BCE, the Delta region of Egypt revolted under a local prince named Psamtik, who, with Greek mercenaries' help, expelled the Assyrians. At the same time, the Elamites mounted another fierce attack in southern Babylonia, preventing the Assyrians from restoring their position in Egypt. Ashurbanipal crushed the Elamites and installed friendly princes in Elam. However, his younger brother, Shamash-Shum-Ukin, rebelled in 652 BCE, enlisting support from various enemies of Assyria across the empire. Ashurbanipal responded by marching against his brother, culminating in a 3-year war that ended with Shamash-Shum-Ukin's death in his burning palace. Ashurbanipal placed a puppet ruler on Babylon's throne and dealt with his other enemies. A long war against the Arabs and another against Elam ended with Elam's devastation and the destruction of its capital, Susa. Ashurbanipal was also a patron of learning. Fascinated by the ancient civilizations of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, he ordered his officials to collect ancient tablets for a vast library he built in Nineveh. These tablets, discovered by archaeologists in the 19th century, are now housed in the British Museum and provide valuable insights into Mesopotamian civilization, especially its religious and literary life. And the last 12 years of Ashurbanipal's reign are shrouded in mystery, as the royal records abruptly end in 639 BCE. He died in 627 BCE. Coinciding with the death of the puppet ruler he had installed in Babylon. Ashurbanipal was succeeded by his son, Ashur-idil-Ilani, in Assyria, while his brother, Sin-shar-ishkun, became king of Babylon. However, Sin-shar-ishkun was driven from Babylon by the Chaldeans, now led by Nabopolassar, sparking a 3-year civil war in Assyria, which Sin-shar-ishkun eventually won, becoming king in 623 BCE. Troubles mounted for Assyria. A 7-year war in Babylonia failed to quell Nabopolassar's revolt. Scythian and Cimmerian raiders rampaged through Assyrian territory unchecked. In 616 BCE, the Chaldeans under Nabopolassar invaded Assyria. Desperate, the Assyrian king sought help from Egypt, but any assistance arrived too late. In 615 BCE, the Medes invaded Assyria, capturing the holy city of Ashur. The Medes and Babylonians then united, and after a year of campaigning, they besieged Nineveh in 612 BCE. After 3 months, the great city fell and was destroyed, along with other Assyrian cities. Only villages remained. 200 years later, Greek soldiers marching through Assyria saw only heaps of rubble where mighty cities once stood, unaware of their former grandeur. The vast Assyrian Empire was divided among its conquerors, the Chaldeans and Medes, marking the beginning of a new era in Middle Eastern history.